time of your life.
Amplia!
This year will be even more fantastic. Get your tickets now for Gone But Not Forgotten 2.
I feel like home. They gave us the memory.
Woman, you could run away too.
They gave us the rhythms of life. Now let's give them their flowers.
Trinidad and Tobago, join us for a special tribute to our legendary musical icons who have passed on in Gone But Not Forgotten.
Including Bunny, Swallow, Singing Francine, Shadow, Arrow, Maestro, Rootsman, Blacks, Sandoli, Ras Shorty Eye, plus lots more. Their music still lives on in our heart. An unforgettable night as we celebrate their legacy in Gone But Not Forgotten. Wednesday, February 4th at Napa and Thursday, February 5th at Sapa. Showtime both nights, 6:30 p.m. Your master of ceremonies, Sonny Bling.
Tickets $300 and $250.
Early bird tickets bought by Monday, January 26th. Cost $50 less.
Available at Crosby's, Jumbo Foods Barataria, Mart's Liquor Palace, Digomate Main Road, all Kenny Sports, Western Union, Tuna Puna, all Extra Foods, Athletes by the Park, and IslandEtickets.com. An extra $10 off for online purchases. For more info, call 732-3402. Gone, but not forgotten.
WESN.
It is an end of an era. We are now officially further diminished. It is perhaps more for us than maybe for the general public, depending on if you were a loyal reader to Newsday or not. Somewhat of a sad time when you consider the fact that the media industry and news media in particular lost another company, lost another set of jobs, and potentially lost an entire set of reporters who went out there and looked for the news. And there have been valid criticisms about the news media industry of the nation. I don't think it's fair to single out any newspaper to be responsible for our deficiencies as an industry and as a society when it comes to the news. Because like politics, the industry responds to the consumers. And unfortunately, we are at a point where it seems as though, whether rightfully identified or misidentified, the consumers are not necessarily displaying enough to indicate that advertising dollars are well spent on local media. Everybody wants the cheap alternative online media. How effective that is, I can't say. But what I can say is online advertising is not going to foot the bill for our local news generation, for our capacity to be able to be up to date with what's going on in our very own country. You can get social media news, but realize usually what happens with social media news, a lot of the times it's based on traditional media putting whatever it is they find on social media, and how much details might be missing in some of these breaking reports on a social media page. Because at the end of the day, you can start off as a one-man operation, as a small operation, AZP News. But to what extent are all of these social media personalities, to what extent do they have the capacity to go out there and find information when it's not forthcoming on the internet? So we started here with 3 newspapers. All my life, well, not all my life, but as far as I can remember, there were 3 newspapers. And now there's, for daily news, 2. And we got a preview when Loop closed down. And as far as I'm aware, at least in some cases, some of the people that worked in Loop, they didn't get a job automatically somewhere else in the industry, because the industry is not in a place of abundance and plenty. So now part of the distress is what's going to happen to all of the people that lost their jobs when Newsday closed down. There were sentiments expressed that for some of them, they're just happy that the uncertainty is over so that they could try and figure out the way forward, which I understand to some extent. But the uncertainty for me is what's going to happen to the industry moving forward. Because if we're not careful, we're going to end up with no news reporters and a social media product that doesn't actually know how to engage the right sources, certain sources, in order to be able to get the information to report on certain stories. Because one of the things I think we underestimate is, I didn't necessarily like the fact that when I was, just a few years ago, reading the news, and at times certain stories, no context was provided. And the problem is, whether it's intentional or not, you can imply certain things, lead viewers, again, whether intentional or not, down to certain conclusions. If you're not careful, it's one of those weird things where sometimes you should try to contextualize as little as possible in order to be objective. Sometimes you have to contextualize, otherwise it's not going to come across as objective. But what was not an issue was the desire to report on the facts. Generally speaking, I hardly ever saw a situation where I felt as though a newspaper, a TV broadcast, radio news were willfully editing, not contextualizing, editing the information they gave you and misrepresenting how they presented it in order to try to craft a narrative. Usually, reporters would report faithfully whatever it is a certain speaker said, a certain public figure, whatever it is the document or the press release, whatever it is they could find about the incident. If they could get eyewitness accounts, they'll report, generally speaking, faithfully to that. Now, there might be certain editorial decisions that might cut things down, but I do find that in a lot of cases, particularly with what a minister might have said, what a prime minister might have said, you don't necessarily see smoking guns or look at that. They totally took whatever out of context. You see this in foreign news media. Just last night, I was watching a video. Some tech guy, tech billionaire who was very, well, let's just say he was very concerned about what he believed to be or perceived to be news media that misrepresented the facts to him. And it wasn't about what he liked or what he didn't like. the fact that the news did not represent the truth to him. And I do believe that our news media actually, on the scale of things, when you weigh it and you balance, they get that right. Now the question is, though, to what extent less reporters looking for stories, because Newsday at times got stories that other papers didn't get. Every paper at times had a unique story or perspective that their peers did not get. And now we lose that. But also, will it end here? Will it end here? This is one of the hard challenges of 2025, of the new normal, where you have something that is technically necessary, and yet it is being, well, pushed aside in the market. You don't want the state to have to be the provider of news. The state should provide things that the private sector cannot provide, like a police service. You don't necessarily want a private sector to provide a police service, because police should not be for profit. And any private capacity generally would be for return on investment. And that's the rub. Private investment into news technically is for return on investment. Now, maybe you could get someone altruistic that would be satisfied with breaking even, but even breaking even is a little tricky. Part of the use of profits is not just to line pockets of shareholders, but also to reinvest in a business in order to ensure it does not fall behind, become obsolete, that it could keep updating itself, its equipment, its methodology, its staff, that it could potentially grow into something bigger, more efficient, more effective. So breaking even for any entity is not necessarily the safest of things. It might just be a way to die slower. And that also assumes that you have an altruistic owner or shareholder group that's willing to take that risk. They invest in something and it's not really giving you a return. Inflation alone will erode the value of your investment. So if you can't get revenue, you go out of business. So should the government be the sole provider of news? Well, no, because the whole point of the Fourth Estate is to be a check on the government. This is something that I think, hopefully, we do not face this challenge to the extreme. We do not have to find an answer to this question in a dire situation, but I fear that we may have to. And I don't know necessarily what the right answer is or what we should do. But more importantly, in part because I don't know what the country or the society would be willing to do, would be willing to accept. Any potential safeguard against news Armageddon is meaningless if it is not supported enough by the country, by the people, because essentially that's what's happening to news media. That's what happened to Loop and now to Newsday. And now the question is it going to happen to any of the other papers? Is it going to happen to any of the TV stations, radio stations? We don't know. It's not necessarily something that you would think that media houses would actually like for competitors to go out of business because it's competing business interests. But I would hazard a guess where I'm not entirely sure if it's seen as positively as you would think, no matter which quarters you look to. Before I take a break, I just wanted to point out a couple other things, one of which, and I've spoken about this before, apparently somebody tried to cross the highway and he was hit by a car initially, and then by several other vehicles. The headline, ironically, sounds worse than the story. The story basically says twice that he was dragged along the highway by, I'm not entirely sure if it was just by a single vehicle or if he was hit multiple times, and each time it was almost like if, forgive the expression, it was almost like if the cars were passing the baton, so to say. And he was dragged for a certain amount of time, then another car came and dragged him again, because on some level, when you're driving, depending on how much traffic's on the highway, you're not going to see something on the road. The only warning you would have is if other cars try to avoid it. But once you put a foreign object in the highway, multiple vehicles can't hit it. And this is the thing, this individual, and this is why they say you shouldn't do this. And I saw someone, I think the day before, cross the Savannah while the light was green and traffic was moving at full speed. Full speed traffic, he just decided, I say, well, no, I'm gonna cross. And I'm watching this a couple cars ahead, and I'm just like, I don't understand what's going on in his brain. Because this was not like a rush hour period where traffic was moving slowly. But I mean, it wasn't as fast as the highway, to be fair. If you looked across the highway, you take your life into your own hands. That's point number one. But point number two, luckily, there was potentially only property damage to the vehicles that might have hit him. But let's just say you're lucky and you survive. You might end up causing a multi-car collision, depending on circumstances, that could lead to someone else getting injured or killed. But I guess I'm speaking to the choir. Probably the vast majority of citizens are not going to cross the highway by foot, right? And because of that alone, the vast majority of you that are listening to me and watching me right now, that's not something you would do. I mean, just walking along the highway to me, I think is risky, but what can I say? The last thing I'll say before we take a break is this. The Minister of Finance is pushing back against those who want to criticize the government issuing a bond for $1 billion US. Former short-term Minister of Finance, Vishnu Dampal, I say that not because to be disparaging, but I think a lot of people might want to disqualify him. He's pointing to the fact that the coupon rate was far higher than previous issues. Now, he is comparing the coupon rate of 2025 issue to bonds issued in 2013 and 2016. So I'm not entirely sure, you know, inflation happened. I don't necessarily know how fair that comparison is. I'm not an economist and finance expert to analyze that technical aspect of it. But I will say this, the minister said that the difference between when the PNM issued bonds and when this government is issuing bonds lay in the measures now being put in place to generate repayment capacity. He said the government was relying on three main revenue streams. Three main revenue streams. These are revenue streams: an expanding energy sector, long-term non-energy investment, and improved tax collection. Which is interesting because what he's doing is not describing three revenue streams. He's describing what he hopes will grow three pre-existing revenue streams. So there are three main revenue streams, but here's the rub. And this is a little bit facetious, but that's like me saying, I want to buy a house, and I'm going to pay the mortgage on the house because I'm putting measures in place to generate repayment capacity to that mortgage. What measures are those going to be? Well, you know, an increased salary, long-term future investments, and, you know, improve repayment plans for when salaries need to be collected. Saying that the energy sector is going to expand is not a plan. You see, everybody wants a raise. Are you going to get a raise? Are you guaranteed for a raise? How much will the raise be? Do you know how much the raise potentially could be? How much it actually would be, if at all? And then, on top of that, you already had a deficit. And as I said before, I think the PNM never disclosed the actual deficit of what they were spending compared to what they should be spending. I mean, the police need body cameras. I don't know if the government hasn't figured that out yet. Whether the country somewhat tolerates you not buying the body cameras or not, whether you get away with it or not, whether you all but say, we didn't buy body cameras and it ain't riot yet. Because that's what it feels like. You're taking a player out of your predecessor's playbook. And by predecessor, I mean former Minister of Finance, Coleman Birch. That's what it feels like. Similar types of decisions. Just because you might think you're getting away with it doesn't mean that you're actually going to get away with it and not suffer any sort of detrimental consequences. So the plan is to bank on things that haven't happened yet. Some of these things are not in writing. Some of these things, I don't even know if you have reasonable estimates. Let's not forget, this is the same minister that said, I can't budget the back pay because I don't know what it is. But somehow he could budget repayment of our US billion bond. And he doesn't know what the revenue generation increases are going to be. He doesn't know. Right now in California, they're potentially looking at a reduction in taxes because they raise taxes. America has more than one state. America is more than California. Businesses have already left. People were already migrating out. They are looking at subtraction by addition. Can Minister Tanku guarantee that that will not happen here? And that's just one aspect of it. Let's not forget, he has a bachelor's in economics, which I believe was his first degree towards becoming a lawyer. So, like myself, it's difficult to say that he is an economist. See, I understand a little bit of economics. I'm not an economist. I speak about the news. I'm not a journalist. I wouldn't say I'm a journalist. I wouldn't say I'm a news reporter. Just because I touch on a thing doesn't mean that I am an expert in said thing. Because if he was, he would have known what diversification meant when he spoke publicly about it on the campaign trail. But that's a whole other story. So I find this very interesting that we have another politician in a long history of politicians promising things, and the promises actually, it's almost like if they don't realize what they're saying doesn't mean what they think it means. What they're promising doesn't mean what they think they're promising. And how they think things are going to go, there are no guarantees that it's going to go that way. So the value of these assurances I mean, it's worth nothing. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. There are new accusations with regards to the failure of the passage of the Zoso bill in the Senate. We'll dig into that and more. Stay tuned. Sean Michael, small talking point. We'll be right back after this.
Last year, you had the time of your life.
Amplia!
This year will be even more fantastic. Get your tickets now for Gone But Not Forgotten 2.
I feel like home. They gave us the memory.
Woman, you could run away too.
They gave us the rhythms of life. Now let's give them their flowers.
Trinidad and Tobago, join us for a special tribute to our legendary musical icons who have passed on in Gone But Not Forgotten.
Including Funny, Swallow, Singing Francine, Shadow, Arrow, Maestro, Rootsman, Blacks, Sandoli, Ras Shorty Eye, plus lots more. Their music still lives on in our heart. An unforgettable night as we celebrate their legacy in Gone But Not Forgotten. Wednesday, February 4th at Napa and Thursday, February 5th at Sapa. Showtime both nights, 6:30 p.m. Your master of ceremonies, Sonny Bling.
Tickets $300 and $250.
Early bird tickets bought by Monday, January 26th cost $50 less.
Available at Crosby's, Jumbo Foods Barataria, Mart's Liquor Palace, Digo Martin Main Road, All Kenny Sports, Western Union, Tunapuna, All Extra Foods, Athletes by the Park, and IslandEtickets.com. An extra $10 off for online purchases. For more info, call 732-3402. Gone, but not forgotten.
Previously on Cover Star.
Just keeping on with my flow.
We met the voices and we met our first two panels of judges. Episode 1, Vonette Bickford and myself, Hannah Abdul. Episode 2, Candice Alcantara and the piano girl Johanna. And shout out to our judges for tonight's episode, Jarrell Forbes, Luke Samerson, and Vonette is back. Over the last 2 episodes, we got into the covers and the judges looked, listened, and scored. 2 contestants were unable to perform due to illness. They did not score and they were out of the running. This is Cover Star, where music history meets its next voice.
On WESN, the content capital.
As you come in. Long time I see you. This station complete. Ready for children party. Mommy! Jay, you can't go nowhere with these children. And you know you can't depend on Kevin neither Steven to see about them. Yes, total waste. So I supposed to stay home whole time? Jada is 12. She could see about that. You just leave Jada to see about Kia and Kayla? I thought it's your mother or your sister. Who? Them always busy. Jada could handle that. She cooking and cleaning a long time. And the next 2, better know what time it is. It's only me, you know. I will talk to my mother. She just home these days. She will make sure the children okay. Alright. Let me see the moves for later.
Before you ramage, make sure the children okay. Call 996 to report all child abuse now. A message from the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. All right, on Saturday, the 7th of February, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., there will be a blood drive. TTMA Central Branch, in collaboration with Mount Hope Blood Bank and Siwa TT, invite you to take part in our February blood drive. It's at 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., as I said, located at Mount Hope Blood Bank, Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. You need your ID card and donor books for previous donors. So listen, this is one of those things in a modern society where we do have to consider those who can. I have in the past, and I don't think I qualify anymore for pre-existing health reasons, but these are some of the things that at times a country runs a risk that certain blood types or just blood in general, and I do believe this has happened before, you know, that we just don't have enough. It makes things very tricky. That's why whenever you have a family member that maybe needs a procedure done, they have to ask for someone to donate because we don't necessarily have a lot of pre-existing stock, and that's important if there's ever an accident or emergency, because you can't necessarily ask around for blood when someone is in immediate critical need of blood for life-saving measures. So those who can, please give. This is again by the Central TTMA Central Branch, Mount Hope Blood Bank, and Sewer TT, Saturday, the 7th of February at the Mount Hope Blood Bank. Please, I want to encourage all those who can, but do so responsibly, right? Because I've seen individuals, when I was giving, the last time I gave blood, not everybody responded quite easily. Do so responsibly. Set up someone to potentially drive you there, pick you up. Be careful. All right, with that said, Zozo time. Let's go, daily review. And yes, as if things weren't going to get more controversial, the Prime Minister throws another dart at the board. And this one, I think, is where you see her previous strategy undermining the next step, the continuation of said strategy. She has not necessarily set herself up for success in how she's handled the public communication of this thing. Because in order to say that, well, after the failure of the passage of the bill that would have allowed for the zones of special operations, the Prime Minister said a senior government senator was approached by 2 independent senators. 2. Keep that number in mind. 2 independent senators. There's a practical reason why that's very relevant in this discussion. Before the vote on Tuesday, these 2 senators approached. Apparently, they wanted a quid pro quo. They wanted favors for votes. Now, on some level, this is the funny thing. Politically speaking, to what extent would we accept this? Right? Because whenever you see anything with regards to politics in other countries, larger countries, there's a lot of informal, well, I'll do this political favor for your support, right? And I don't know if it's because our politicians and our parliament is very much party line, right? Because initially when I saw the headlines, I was like, what, they wanted money? Because the Prime Minister said, my government will not buy votes. So if it's something like corruption outright, then they're like, well, this is bad. But if it's something like, you want my support in this thing, and I want your support in this thing, but it's just that we have a very loose definition to him. You have your program that you want to get through, I have my program that I want to get through. Is that the favors that we're talking about? She said personal favors. So if it's the case of, I want my taxes removed, or I want the red tape cut in order to whatever bureaucracy for my personal interest. If that's the case, well, that's more along the lines of corruption, right? But it's interesting. The reason why I say that she has set herself up for failure is she has shown a pre-existing bias against the independent bench, one that I thought strategically was not a smart play, because you are preempting their disagreement with you, right? Now, granted, you could say that the independent senators should be objective enough to ignore the Prime Minister's personal insults and attack against them. But on some level, I believe the independent senators are human, and more importantly, they might ask themselves, why does the Prime Minister seem to be desperate to get this thing through? Now, I believe somebody said yesterday, maybe it was a reverse psychology situation. Or maybe I was told that off air, a reverse psychology situation. You kind of tell them, this is how I'm perceiving your resistance, to kind of make the independent bench think, no, well, if we vote against it, we'll be proving that we're technically PNM senators in disguise. Ooh. But the flip side is, you could also get the reverse. You could also get people who are stubbornly independent, saying, I'm not going to be swayed by whatever you have to say. If you want to think that I'm biased against you, that's a you problem. I am not going to be forced off my track just for the sake of appearances. Psychologically, an attempt to use reverse psychology could work against you, depending on the personality of the individual you're trying to affect. So it didn't make sense. To me, if you want to get support from the independent bench, it made sense to try to negotiate, compromise, have dialogue, not just throw insults, but more importantly, one of the things I think that on a practical level hurts in the Prime Minister's case is, you're basically saying, I assume that you're wrong. I will not engage with you any further because I assume you're wrong. Whether that was the intention or not, you're throwing them away. You're throwing away the possibility of working with the independent bench off the jump. You are cutting off avenues of dialogue. So then they potentially will consider less of what it is you present. They will not necessarily hear the full message of why this bill was important, because you are not able to give them the full message because you cut off avenues of communication and dialogue. What we get in the presentations in the Senate, let's be real, that nonsense is not sufficient. That is not a real debate. The real work would have been behind the scenes, having discussions. Okay, let's just get down to business. What are your concerns? How could we potentially meet in the middle, fix enough of your concerns that you will support this bill? The implication of the Prime Minister attacking them in advance of the vote in the manner that she did implies that she threw all of that out the window. And what you get from the public utterances, whether outside of Parliament or within Parliament, is probably insufficient to effectively craft something as sophisticated as a piece of legislation that is going to cut into the rights of citizens in order to fight something as insidious and complex as major organized crime. We're not talking about pickpockets here. We're not talking about people who want to steal a little candy from a little tuck shop. We ain't talking about someone that's going to snatch a chain in the middle of the street. We're talking about major organized crime, gangs, and the drug trade, and high-level violence, criminal activities. So why not put your best foot forward? Your best foot forward would be diplomacy first, and if it doesn't go through, then you could cast stones. But you started casting stones before the vote, so now it doesn't go through. You say you're not surprised. All right, quit while you're ahead, because now you're saying 2 senators came wanting personal favors. Not saying who they are, not saying what these actual favors are, as far as I'm aware, right? Now, here's the issue. On some level, what does that have to do with the bill failing? Because you needed 4 out of 9 to pass the bill. 2 should not be enough to sink you. And on a practical level, so there's 7 others upon which you needed, from what I have read, 4 votes, right? I haven't run the numbers myself. There's 7 others. How does the specific issues of those 2, how does that excuse the failure to try to negotiate with the other 7? And that's why I say that number there, if it was that all of the independent bench, the majority of the independent bench, 5 out of 9 of the independent bench, then 5 out of 9, technically you still have a chance with 4, right? But you know, the margins, they are so tight, I could maybe excuse that. Let's not forget, 8 voted no, 1 abstained. So what did the 2 somehow lobby against you amongst their peers in the independent bench? Maybe if you didn't cut off dialogue with the independent bench and just assume that they are going to be biased against you, maybe you could have countered whatever it is the alleged 2 might have said to the other 7. This is the thing. Strategically, this looks like schoolyard politics, not even office politics or small office politics. I mean, listen, maybe I'm overestimating major corporations in this country. But what it does not look like is someone that actually knows how to engage politically to entities external to their own political party. Because as political leader, you control your party. That's easy. But people outside of your party, you kind of have to deal with on a more near-peer level, even if they're technically not your peer, because they're not a subordinate of you. You cannot have certain expectations for people on the outside. So strategically, this doesn't make sense to me. Now, usually when something doesn't make sense, now you have to start asking what exactly was the reasoning, the motivation, the agenda behind this decision making. And that now goes into an area where a lot of people probably do not want to go yet. And I myself, without more information, the more extreme considerations, I'm not necessarily comfortable going down there yet because we're venturing into the unknown now. But when things don't make sense to you in politics, usually there's something that isn't said that you're not going to like. Whether it is malicious, whether it is just something silly, you're not going to like it. Making this claim now, how does this help the country or even the perception of the government? They will be more than willing to come back if motivated enough. So politically, I don't see how this makes sense. Then you go, of course now, I've criticized the independent bench when I thought what they had to say was against the public interest. I have pointed to some of the same things that you pointed to, but the way how you're doing it, it's making it too easy for us to disregard what it is you have to say. And this was done, from what I understand, in a Facebook, no, in our X post. X is the platform formerly known as Twitter. So it was done in effectively a tweet. Not in a press conference, not in a public statement, not in any sort of audio-visual representation that this is the Prime Minister's. For all we know, it could be a staffer. I don't know about you, but governance by tweets is not necessarily something that I want to see done often. If there's a personal opinion that you want to put out there in that capacity, even if it's on a work-related matter, all right, fine. You know, it might not be important enough to have a full press release from the office of the Prime Minister. But alleging that 2 independent senators wanted personal favors for votes, that's not a small thing. So, of course, now the independent bench has to defend themselves, which independent Senator Anthony Vieira, amongst others, are challenging the Prime Minister to release the names of the 2 independent senators that allegedly attempted to get some sort of reciprocation, some sort of consideration for their votes. Release the names. Because essentially, this is something that I criticized the previous government for. They throw accusations out there. This is the PNM. They throw accusations out there. They imply a lot. But they never do anything about it. So they're saying, look at all of this evil that we have to deal with. You doing anything about it? No. So then at some point, why am I going to believe you? And it's not necessarily fair. But living in that environment for years means that you don't get to now do it and have a honeymoon period where we're going to take our time before we start to look at it as a detriment. We're already there. We don't want to see anything that looks like similar behavior. So when Senator Vieira is saying, well, name names, that's basically what I wanted to say. I had that same thought before I read what he was reported to have said. What is this whole thing? Hey, Gary Griffith did all these bad things, and it'll come out after the local government election. All right, still waiting for that political promise to come through. Throwing out these accusations out there where you're not naming names, where you're not giving us any details. Essentially, you could say anything at that point. Think about it. Politicians, when they are trying to just say these generalized statements that pinpoint nothing, they could technically say anything. How are we supposed to know? They don't want to say specific things because potentially they could be sued for defamation if it's not true. So now you have to ask. You have to consider the question. And it's not one that you automatically jump to this conclusion. But whenever a politician does not want to reveal detailed information about whatever accusation they throw out there, you have to consider, is it because it is slander? Is it because it's not as, usually it's because it's not as clear-cut. So they'll say they wanted favors, but then when you look at the favor, it's not as clear-cut, as bad as an offense as whatever it is that they say, right? Or they don't want to highlight an issue because the issue is not limited to those people alone. One of the things that I believe you could speculate with regards to Guy Griffith and his case with regards to the merit list is in court. But one of the things that you could speculate about with Guy Griffith, the implication was something funny was going on with FULs and with the sale of ammunition and the importation of ammunition and firearms and the sale of firearms, all that, and the distribution of licenses because you have to pay for an FUL apparently, right? Notice no one cares that you have to pay for driver's licenses, but you have to pay for an FUL. I'm fairly certain the driver's license racket is probably earning more revenue than any FUL racket ever could because there are far more people in the country that want driver's licenses than firearm users' licenses. So even though the per unit bribery cost, whatever it's alleged to be, might be more, them licensing officers that are not officially getting any consideration for giving your child a driver's license, there's a lot. There's a lot. Now, we got a lot of implication thrown at Gary Griffith's way. No definitive statements. Also, because I believe this is the thing, no one is going to believe, oh, everything was fine and above board, and then Gary comes in and magically it's just the most corrupt thing ever. And now that he's gone, it's back to being fine and clean. I'm pretty sure no one is going to buy that for a second. That this one guy, oh, that was the entirety of the problem. So is it that you don't necessarily want to highlight who the independent senators are because you don't necessarily want the public to look further into this situation? Maybe there are a lot of senators who want quid pro quo. Now, on some level, that might be unlikely because, hey, remember, parliamentarians follow party lines. But maybe various political parties have engaged with the independent senators in this manner in the past. Who knows? It might not be this crop. There were other independent senators before that are no longer here. Who has dirty laundry that they don't want to let out? Remember, releasing the CLICO report, it took a little over a decade. It wasn't commissioned by the PNM. I'm not too sure. I believe it was finished before the PNM came into right? But There was a 2016 report, so maybe not fully. So the media has asked the Prime Minister, the senators are, she has not given us the details. The independent bench is asking that, right? Independent Senator Choate is quoted as saying, well, if such a thing had occurred, I would imagine it would have been spoken about before. That is just my instinctive response. But I'll tell you something. I don't intend to be dragged into any sort of debate through the media about what the Prime Minister may or may not have said on social media. Think about that. I have not seen the post. I have no comment on it apart from to say that in answer to your question to me, I certainly did not approach any government senator, official, or otherwise, nor did any government official or senator approach me or otherwise. That's the other thing. That's the other thing. You might want to hide your dealings, right? Did the government bench attempt something? Did the government attempt something? I don't know. You have to ask these questions when details are not forthcoming and stuff is just thrown out there like random piles of meh. Independent Senator Vieira, he's quoted to have told Guardian Media, I think this is an attempt to gaslight, destabilize, and discredit. That's how it comes across to me. Especially because of the pre-insults, the pre-vote insults, the previous insults that were essentially personal attacks that were potentially unwarranted, because my criticisms of Anthony Vieira had nothing to do with this bill. Now, the independent bench, they cited to one of our media houses, Guardian Media, at the very least, several factors, but the main one is outright refusal to consider amendments. Right? Anthony Vieira said also, his difficulty was not with the principle of the bill, but with how the bill was drafted. And this is similar to what I said yesterday. It's not necessarily the concept, right? But rather the implementation. I said it differently. I said with regards to not the bill itself, but with the circumstances around it, or the people around it, something like that. But essentially that's what I meant. It's the implementation, right? He said with how the bill is drafted. Those amendments were aimed at strengthening the bill, narrowing the constitutional override. Narrowing the constitutional override, that's a big thing. That's basically trying to limit the negatives that a piece of legislation like this will have for it to exist. That's the whole point. You are overriding certain aspects of the Constitution, suspending certain rights of citizens. So as much as you could limit that, you don't want to mess with individuals' constitutional rights unnecessarily. So as much as you can limit that, the better it is overall. Clarified objective criteria for declaring zones, strengthening civilian and parliamentary oversight. That's also very important, and to me, should be a given on a piece of legislation like this. Safeguarding the constitutional role of the President as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Again, if you want to change the whole Constitution, that's fine. But notice, President declares state of emergencies, but they're like, nah, let's just give it to the Prime Minister for ease of doing business. All of a sudden, we want ease of doing business. Ensuring that military personnel exercise police powers are properly trained and certified. You all want military people on the streets without any extra training? That, I don't know how well that's going to end up. And Senator Vieira rightfully pointed out, these were not frivolous suggestions, right? And the government rejected it all outright because they want to get this thing done in time to give them cover for when the state of emergency runs out. And to that, I would say, it's not the independent senator's fault that the government did not move faster. It's not. It's not the independent senator's fault that the government, in their estimation, does not have time to consider a reasonable response in a debate in Parliament over passing new legislation that is going to affect the rights of citizens. That's why it requires the majority that it requires. You can't pass this with a simple majority as is. This is how legislation works. You present a bill and you engage with the people that are not you. So if they have any concerns, you try to address those concerns so that the bill could be passed with their support. And that might, at times, require compromise in the form of amendments suggested by the independent bench, the opposition bench, whoever is not you. But what the government is saying is, trust us with no evidence, because I don't believe they're sharing said intelligence. This is another reason why bipartisan intelligence and national security override would help. Because then you could say, we shared with them the intelligence. Let them tell you, let the opposition and the independent bench tell you if the intelligence is not warranted or not, that we need this done now for now. And now maybe they did share the intelligence, but I assume they didn't, because this is general practice of governments. Share? Who's sharing information? But again, that leaves the public now in a, what is the truth? How many times are you going to ask us to just believe you on good faith when it comes to the suspension of the rights of citizens? That is different. This is a different ball game. And I do wonder to what extent the government is underestimating the severity of what it is they're asking and how inappropriate it is to try to rush it. Because the implication of what Senator Vieira is saying is, it's not that we disagreed with the law. We were willing to support the law, but we wanted to see certain safeguards. So now the question you have to ask is, because again, I think that the government's stance on this is not reasonable. Is there hidden agendas that we don't know? Why is it that they don't want these amendments? Why is it that they don't want a sunset clause? Why? How hard is it to put it in? I don't want a situation where we have to proactively remove this legislation. I want a situation where we have to proactively reaffirm it so that it is not so easily kept. But all of that points to maybe there's something that we don't know with regards to why the government wants this. And the more I go down that line of speculation, the more the conspiracy theories are going to have cannon fodder. Opposition Senator Faris Alwari said government rejected 106 amendments to the bill. And the thing is, I think at the end of the day, the fact that it was rejected all outright, the fact that you rejected all of it outright, you didn't even try to compromise with some. We put in the safeguards because as murder and crime will escalate, as the state of emergency comes to an end on the 31st of January, and as everybody is going to walk out of detention, the vast majority of them are going to not have had an interview by the police. So you just lock them up for the state of emergency. What are you going to do? Is that what the timing is for? To keep people in prison? That was a quote from Alwari. He went on to say, the government, I believe, really wanted this law to fail because they knew it was unconstitutional. They refused to accept amendments, and their intention was to blame the opposition and independents for the lack of passage of the law when crime starts to escalate. So I want to mark the spot today on behalf of the opposition. Look at the amendments that we put forward. You will see how we intended to assist in constitutionality. Look at our deep concerns that you cannot just go into zones and create a division in society of that type, of the type that bill proposed. I mean, it's not necessarily a crazy theory. You have the detention orders that essentially once the SOE is done, that's done, right? Now you're facing lawsuits. Now you're facing the consequences of, well, you actually didn't accomplish anything in the long run with the state of emergency. What are you going to do? Now the murder rate, we already seen signs of the murder rate increasing. Small increase. I believe it was 25 last year, 29 this year for January. Small increase, January this year to January last year. But maybe you're thinking, hey, this might be a sign of things to come. We need another Band-Aid. This Band-Aid ain't gonna fly. That's okay. We could blame the opposition and independents for the crime. The problem is you're the government. I said this about the crime talks. You need to show that you did everything you could to compromise with the other side. And if you show that, then you could say it's all their fault. It seems as though the independent bench and the opposition, whether they intentionally determined the strategy or unintentionally fell into the strategy, they were the ones that were looking to show, hey, we're willing to engage on this and try to get this through. But we're not just going to rubber stamp this without looking it through and having concerns. The fact that the government apparently just rejected any amendments outright. They didn't even put up the dog and pony show of we looked at the amendments. A couple days later, we came back and jockeyed for position and changes and modifications. They didn't even go through that. They just wanted to rush this thing through. Was it that because you weren't prepared to actually now put in that work? Because you knew you didn't care if the bill passed or not? You just wanted to politically blame your opponents? We have to consider the theory not because it's a good theory, not because it's a plausible theory, but merely because it's a possible theory in the face of a situation that seems nonsensical. And it's a potential explanation as to why a nonsensical situation was allowed to occur. The government is not engaging with the other side whose support they need in any meaningful way, in any constructive way, and then wants to blame the other side for the failure to pass this legislation. When I say it like that, how does that make sense? All right, going on for too long on this, so I'll cut this short here. This new aspect of the zones of special operations debate nationally is probably going to come across again. I do, however, this might be beating a dead horse. I honestly don't care. Because this is just one of those things with editorial oversight, right? What do you cover? What do you repeat? What do you stop coverage of? If you repeat it too much, are you trying to go with sensational, redundancy? If you don't continue talking about the story, are you moving on and letting an important piece of news die? Before I go into this, I want to remind everybody about what happened last week. If we could just run the clip of the shooting, the short clip now. That is, by the way, what the commissioner and the head of the Police Social and Welfare Association are saying, well, it's fine. It's fine. There's some sort of explanation to this. We don't know the whole truth. We don't know the whole truth of a man getting shot when he has his hands up and he doesn't have a gun on him. Well, he's not pointing a gun to the police, brandishing a gun to the police, or doing anything threatening to the police. We don't know the whole truth. Apparently, there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not so easy to look at a man with his hands up getting shot and saying there's something wrong with that. It's not so easy, right? So with that said, and I think that situation very much is tied to the legislation and how we perceived it. And I've said that before, and I've said that Gary Griffith has also, at least I believe, I had this thought, identified that he also made that connection. And he has come out with his response with regards to the failure of the Zone of Special Operations Bill in the Senate. So, to go into his response, because I do want to do that, I do want to highlight what he has to say, because someone has to be an adult in the room, and apparently, when everyone else is failing, although maybe the senators that voted no and abstained, you could argue they had a very mature position as well. But when it comes to the commentary on this overall crime situation, There's not a lot of adults talking right now, particularly from the administration or people in authority. Someone has to do it. Maybe it's Gary Griffith. Let's get into it now. It's time to cue this.
Good morning. It is believed that this country is totally divided right down the middle as it pertains to persons who supported the zone of special operations and those who opposed it. And we have seen what transpired in Parliament. Many persons are pleased, many persons are disappointed. But this is not based on a division this time around, based on politics. And I'll tell you why. The catalyst for crime reduction is the implementation of government policies. So if you have a commissioner of police or a security minister or homeland security minister who will come up with policies, units, technology, systems to provide deterrent and to reduce crime, like what we would have seen in 2013 to 2015 or 2018 to 2021, there will be no need for a state of emergency or a zone of special operation. In the absence of commissioners or ministers coming up with policies, units, systems, programs, where we saw none of that in 2015 to 2018 and 2021 to 2026, inclusive of the last year by this commissioner, the government was left with no choice but to implement a state of emergency. Had the government not done that, we would have seen a murder rate of over 600 again, because there was nothing new, nothing dynamic, no new unit, no new technology, no new system, no new program, nothing at all. So we would have seen the continuation of crime escalating as it did in 2024, we'd have seen the same in 2025. So indirectly, the government did the right thing by calling the SOE. Hundreds of lives were saved. The zone of special operation was the same thing. It was to continue the process. The country, I could say it right now that I am disappointed, because the country is going to pay a price, and the law-abiding citizens are the ones that are going to pay the price. And the reason for this is not because of the independent senators or the opposition just being against the government. And there are many persons who have attacked me because of my support for the police service and support of the zone of special operation. But I know the importance of this. Without that zone of special operation and SOE now shutting down, a lot of these individuals who are going to come back out, they are going to hurt the country and hurt it badly. And that is what I did not want. I don't think any law-abiding citizen wants that. But what has caused so many people to be against the zone of special operation, it has to do with the arrogant, obnoxious, and unprofessional behavior by the Commissioner of Police.
Okay, well, when I said adult in the room, maybe the language used by the former commissioner was not necessarily the most professional. However, in this case, emotionally, I understand it. Right? Granted, it might be a stretch to say his motivations and my motivations are the same. Maybe they're not. But I'll understand it. I'll look past it. I would have preferred maybe a bit more professional. Hey, maybe now is the time to be a bit more harsh in tone and harsh in the adjectives used to describe the individual in question. Now, it's interesting. You have to kind of take everything that he says in its totality. He's not against the zones, he's not against the police, but he's pointed to the fact that, look, where are the plans? Where are the new procedures, the new methods, the new measures to try to take a handle on crime? You have none. You have none, right? So what do? You look to what was working, because as I said yesterday, and again, maybe I should apologize to the caller for cutting him off, but I didn't want to go into a long debate. I believe it was 9:50 at the time, or 9:40, almost 9:50 at the time, maybe quarter to 10, and we did have another call coming in. I heard the basic signal. I don't know if the public did, so I didn't necessarily want to try to squeeze a whole debate that probably was not going to go anywhere. The murder rate technically dropped under Acting Commissioner Junior Benjamin with the state of emergency in January last year. December the 30th or whenever it was called, January last year, right, until March. That was before the election. Now, Gary points out he agrees with the decision for this government to call a state of emergency when it did after the election. And to some extent, I can understand that sentiment. Even though the murder rate throughout the election period stayed low, and for about 2 to 3 months, it wasn't covered by a state of emergency. So even though that was the case, it could have been 3 to 4 months, right? The murder rate did not spike in between the state of emergency periods. But it is reasonable to say that with all things being equal, if you want to maintain the low level of murders, at least in the short run, call another state of emergency. That, however, begs the question, was it because of a threat to the government? Was the threat to the government destabilization politically because the murder rate was going to go up, or was it an actual threat to the government? Now, that will be difficult for us to ever know until certain, maybe classified information, for lack of a better term, I don't know if that's the term that we use locally for it officially, becomes unclassified and public knowledge. I don't know. But the state of emergency was not completely unreasonable, right? We could question the motives behind it. But generally speaking, because the one the PNM called was for crime, and the extension that the UNC called for was for crime. It wasn't for no threat against the government, which would have been the second time that there was a threat against the government, which ironically is, you know, if you believe 2011, you could actually see maybe this one was plausible too. But now the zones of special operations is an extension. And Gary Griffith is saying that was a necessary extension. You could see the practical necessity of the extension. But the issue is the concerns with regards to the zones and how it's going to roll out is magnified, whether fairly or unfairly, rightly or unjustly, by that police shooting. And how the commissioner handled the police shooting. Let's get into the next clip. Gary Griffith goes into it further.
It was so unfortunate that that situation with the police shooting of a vehicle with a couple in it took place just a few days before this bill was to be passed or not passed. And because of that, many persons saw police abuse of authority. And the Commissioner of Police, it's obvious that the Commissioner of Police, and even endorsed now by the Police Welfare Association, to endorse the fact that if police are involved in any shooting, they can still go back out onto the streets on patrol with a weapon. That shows that the Commissioner of Police and the head of the Welfare Association have never gone further north of Shaka Shakari. They've never gone further east of Tobago. They are totally ignorant in understanding international best practice. Almost every developed country, police departments, what they do is as soon as there's a shooting, regardless of whether the officer did the right thing, whether he saved lives, whether he was wrong, you immediately take them off of that duty to ensure that public confidence will not say that, listen, this person may be involved in something wrong and you still have him out on the street until the operation, the investigation has been complete, that you put him on administrative duty. Additionally, the same Commissioner of Police, Guerrero, understood that in situations like that, someone could have some degree of instability, emotional instability based on the shooting, which is why he agreed to counseling for the police officers. So you're providing counseling for someone based on the fact that someone may become unstable in some manner, and because of that, you're still going to take them out and put them onto the street to hold an automatic weapon that can kill 35 persons in 3 seconds. You provided the counseling so you know that something could be wrong with the officers. Additionally, as I said, international best practice allows that at all times you send them on administrative duty. By the Welfare Association and the Commissioner of Police foolishly agreeing that after that video footage as well, to say that it's okay for them to go back out onto the streets. What that has done is caused many persons to say, well, listen, this could be my wife, this could be my children, and persons are very afraid. They're afraid of police abuse because they're seeing a Commissioner of Police that is stating that my primary concern is not looking after the security and safety of citizens or the perception and fear, but looking after my police officers. And you have to know how to balance that line. And what he has done is totally irresponsible. It has caused many persons to be fearful that that situation yesterday was that couple in that vehicle. Tomorrow in a Zoso situation, it could be me or my family.
Now, here's the thing. To be fair to the Commissioner, it might not be that the officers are back on the street, Galil strapped in hand, ready to go to shoot somebody else again. It might not be that. What it might be is he doesn't want to say they're suspended, because if he says they're suspended, the court of public opinion is going to assume that they're guilty of doing something wrong. So the Commissioner and the head of the Social and Welfare Association, they're thinking it's not fair if the court of public opinion condemns them because we suspend them. So we're not going to say that they're on desk duty. Maybe they are practically on desk duty or lighter duty. Maybe they have been relieved of certain things. Look, you can't go out there. We need to follow certain steps and procedures, right? Before you can go back out there. In part because Griffith brings up a good point. If you need counseling after such a traumatic event, because Lord only knows that you gunning down somebody who has his hands up in the air can be quite traumatic. And that should be the priority. As I believe someone pointed out, has anyone said whether or not the police or the state is offering counseling to the survivor? Probably not, because then their legal advice might be, that might seem as an admission of guilt, so you can't do that. Meh. And therein lies the issue. The optics of this situation, I think, has run away from the commissioner and the head of the Social Welfare Association. Because you're looking at the micro issue, the micro level. It's not fair to the officers. How are we going to do that? The officers are not going to trust that I have their back. I'm going to lose the respect of the service, the trust of the service, so I need to protect my guys. The association needs to protect its members. And Gary's saying, time out, what about protecting the citizens? Because potentially this is an attempt to shield police officers from what they think might be unfair public condemnation, which in this case, the public condemnation, regardless of a suspension or not, might be fully warranted. Might be fully warranted, right? I don't know to what extent other people in the public are going to go to, so I can't say that it is. But what this whole thing also shows is that the Commissioner of Police has no real assessment of the macro view of this whole thing, of the overarching view of this whole thing. Because it seems as though he gave no consideration to how will this harm the service, the public perception of the service, much less his own public perception. Because in an attempt to save the reputation, assuming this is what it is, assuming that they are not actually actively patrolling with firearms, ready to go again, showing that at least to many of us, not the Commissioner of Police, not the head of the union, that they did not exercise good judgment and their capacity to deal with a violent confrontation should be questioned, because it wasn't a violent confrontation until they started shooting. In order to protect, potentially, if this, my theory of his motivations are true, their reputation, you know, the guys that killed a man, in order to protect their reputation, you are sacrificing the reputation of every other officer alongside them, plus you're not really making them look any better. You're making them look worse because you're associating those same three officers with a cover-up, or at least the public perception of a cover-up. If they need counseling, maybe they need to take a break. Maybe they need to be removed from a situation where they might end up in a similar circumstance again. That makes sense, right? But no, what it looks as though is this is internal politicking, business as usual, one squad, one song, the blue wall, support your brothers, blindly. Let's see what else Gary Griffin had to say.
To do with the government. The government, I continue to state, I think they did the correct thing by pushing those, so I see the importance of it. I think it will have assisted, but people are fearful of police abuse of authority. Further, because of this situation, there's a standard operational procedure, a departmental order, that standing order making it mandatory for police officers to use body cameras, and this commission has refused to implement that. So because of these things, had we put that mandatory procedure for police officers to have to use the body cameras, had we the Commissioner of Police use international best practice and have these officers who were involved in the shooting go immediately on administrative leave. If those things were done, it would have minimized the concern that many persons in this country have of this country becoming a virtual police state. That is the problem. The problem lies, I think, the Commissioner has single-handedly destroyed this bill, and nothing is being said or done by the Police Service Commission because they have no training, experience, or qualification in law enforcement, in minimum use of force, in international best practice. practice. So they've stayed silent, allowing the commissioner and the Welfare Association to talk, make stupid comments. And with those comments, you are seeing police officers involved in a shooting with someone surrendering. And then the commissioner has the audacity to say, well, what, you all didn't see what happened earlier. That is irrelevant. That alone shows his ignorance in understanding minimum use of force. Someone could be shooting at police officers. They run miles away, or the next day, and they drop their weapon and their hands are in the air. You can't use that based on vengeance on what you did before. Just by the commissioner stating that, it seems that his knowledge as it pertains to community policing, minimum use of force policy, understanding international best practice, understanding the importance of public trust and confidence, he does not understand. So his actions recently on behalf of the police service has totally affected public trust and confidence in the police service, with the Police Service Commission doing nothing. So let us understand the ZOSO is something, a bill I really hope that the country could understand the importance of this. And because so many people are concerned, it is because of the erratic, irrational behavior by the Commissioner of Police not to adhere to international best practice and refusing to adhere to standing orders. If this was done, we would not have the problem we have right now, where unfortunately the criminals yet again may very well have the upper hand.
What did I say earlier? Things seem nonsensical. There might be some sort of unknown agenda behind it. Think about it. We have a police service that has a trust and confidence issue, to say the least. It's tanked. I mean, I would imagine now it's either 0 or somehow less than 0, right? It's a high fidelity issue. So, the Minister of Homeland Security, former police officer, his statements imply a support for no body cameras. The commissioner decides, I could do it on the cheap. Note that when they canceled the order, they did not say that they're going to now start processing a cheaper alternative. They just canceled the order, and as far as we're aware, nothing is coming down the pipe. No new attempt to procure body cameras, as far as I'm aware, you could correct me if I'm wrong, was told. Maybe I missed it in the reporting, in the articles, in the commissioner's statements. Maybe I missed it, right? So you have that. Then you have a situation where the commissioner and the union is trying to defend what I don't think there's a defense for it. I'm the guy at times that wants to be the devil's advocate. I've got nothing on this one. Nothing. So to me, the commissioner's defense makes no sense. It makes not just no sense, it's less than 0 cents here. Less than 0 cents. Gary Griffith points out, use of force policy. He could shoot at you, but the moment he drops his gun on the ground and puts his hands up, he is no longer an active threat. Just because he shot at you in the past doesn't mean that, for what? Is it in perpetuity? That now you could just shoot him on the road, whoever he may be? And now it brings the question, this is the thing. It's not that I think the commissioner is inept and incompetent, but he is saying things and taking a stance that technically speaking implies or shows or forces us to consider his incompetence. Whether we want to consider him being incompetent or not, his statements are forcing us to have to consider him incompetent. Or there's some unspoken agenda behind all of this that we don't know. Now, maybe it is the one squad, one song agenda. Maybe he thinks he needs to do that in order to protect his reputation as leader of the police service. And that's more important to him than the trust and confidence of the public in the service and in him. Right? And it's not as though the service hasn't had controversial issues before. So, and I want to point out, last week, Ashraf on this show supported the ZOSO concept. This week, Karen, yesterday on this show, pointed to the success that Jamaica had with the ZOSO concept. But I pointed to the higher levels of trust and confidence and willingness to work with the police by the Jamaican people. And dare I say, the TTPS does not have that. Why is it that the leadership of the service seemingly is doing nothing? Can you tell me anything except talking a big game, backing it up with no actions that the current commissioner has done in order to improve the trust and confidence in the service? Has he resolved the situation with the commissioner of police being arrested by one of his subordinates, an arrest by which no law could be stated that she broke? That might have been incorrect grammar. Let me restate. They can't say what law she broke, but they arrested her. And yet we have no explanation or justification for that fact. It's one thing if you don't charge, but in order to arrest somebody, you need to be able to at least verbalize what law you broke. Usually, in any sort of right-thinking jurisdiction, the judge will look at a situation like that if you dare take that to trial and say, you had to be smoking way too much marijuana. Because how could you arrest somebody and you cannot vocalize they broke this law? You can't. You can't. That implies that another member of the executive doesn't even know how to do her job, because if you're going to arrest somebody and you didn't even figure out what law they supposedly broke, or you don't know the law well enough to know that they broke it or didn't break it, what are you doing on the executive? Because even if you didn't lead the investigation, you approved it. Whole dog and pony show, whole media spectacle. Where's our explanation to that? We don't have it. So then now you come into this situation and you do this to us. Make it make sense. Make it make sense, please. Now, granted, I don't necessarily think that it failed to pass because of the shooting. I think the shooting contributed. But it goes back to the fact that the non-government senators, they had some things they wanted to address. There's a comment. I want to pull up the comment now if you can. It reportedly went through over 106 amendments. No, it didn't. According to the opposition and the independent bench, the government rejected outright the amendments, at least the amendments that the independent bench proposed. At one point, did they risk weakening or sabotaging the original intent of the law? I understand that. That's why you have a dialogue. You have a dialogue so that the government can say, this is what you want. Now we discuss it. We take the time to say, this is why what you want to do to maybe restrict some of the provisions is going to make the law too ineffectual, and why we need it to have a certain strength or certain level of effect. But again, the implication of what was said, and let me just go back to make sure. The opposition senators claiming the government rejected 106. I don't know why I read it as 160. 106 amendments. That's what Farisawari is saying that they rejected. The independent bench is saying all of their proposed amendments were rejected. So it did not go through. If it went through amendments, it wasn't from the opposition side and the independent side. So because of that, what was the risk? Is the government perfect? Are you saying that the government has the perfect level of constitutional suspension, of reduction of individual rights, the perfect level of means to redress in case anything goes wrong, the perfect level of the severity of this measure? They have it all pat, and everybody else, their concerns don't matter. The concept, Gary Griffith is not saying the concept is wrong. I would argue that the need for the concept is a position that we should not be in. However, now that we find ourselves here, I am willing to concede the short-term need of measures like this. The government even tried to sell it as a short-term need. Senator Stage said 2 to 3 years, 5 years tops. Then the AG comes out and say it's not a short-term measure. Which is it? Which is it? We can't even get a consistent message when you think about it, about how this is going to be implemented, about the why this is going to be implemented from the government bench. And yes, you might not like him. There are times when he takes things very personally, and he is more than willing to, for lack of a better word, attack certain individuals. You could say I do that at times, whether I do it to the same severity or not, I'll leave that for other people to decide. But at the end of the day, a lot of what he says, yes, the things he said about the commissioner, to describe the commissioner, that might seem unprofessional. But the reasoning for him saying those things, they're very clear. They're very, very well thought out. I understand them quite easily and appreciate them and agree with them. And it's very unfortunate because as a public issue, the two things are connected. However, they are technically separate things, separate aspects of the fight against crime. One of the things that helps your trust and confidence is if you can successfully engage with the independent bench, successfully engage with the opposition bench. Because I'm going to tell you what's not going to happen. What is not going to happen is when it's time to appoint a new president who is then going to swap out the independent bench, I'm fairly certain there will be very little confidence outside of UNC supporter circles that that independent bench is somehow going to be the independent bench that is going to be objectively, magically, perfectly independent. So I want to remind the government, similar to how the PNM are looking to try to pass the blame on for things that they were potentially responsible for that the government inherited. Careful about what you say now, because it could very well be used against you when the perception would very easily look the same. Because you started off with everybody winning, and now it seems like you're slowly rolling out the turnover. And listen, I get it. You expect that there's going to be turnover on the independent bench because there's going to be a new president. And I'm not necessarily going to say, oh, we need to keep some of these people. Maybe some of them, definitely not all of them. I think maybe perhaps you shouldn't be an independent senator for multiple, 1 term, 2 terms, fine. 3, 4, 5 terms, I don't know if anyone's reached there yet. I don't think so. But let's take the next set of comments. The AG said some amendments were valid and the bill could return amended. Does that automatically mean the bill was badly drafted, or was the volume of amendments itself part of the problem? You see, the issue is the volume is secondary because the government has a time frame that they think or they want to tell us that this needs to be passed by. But this is not a simple piece of legislation. So the fact that it wants to be rushed is questionable, first of all. This is something that you have to do responsibly, right? And again, if he said the amendments were valid, why are they not being considered? Does it mean automatically that the bill was badly drafted? First of all, I think it is safe to assume that all bills, the first draft, the initial draft, is not going to be perfect, right? And it would be irresponsible to not look at amendments and to not understand that, listen, there's probably always room for improvement. And in fact, even after you go through the process of amendments and changes and compromise, there might still be room for improvement, even if you go through the process, even if the independent senators are satisfied, and assuming that everything they say is above board, right? And again, what delay? The legislation was delayed because the AG went out of the country. They're seemingly the ones to rush it, but they were the ones that delayed it the most with something that had nothing to do with the debate. This is not a small piece of legislation. I'll go on about these comments, but we are San Fernando line, so I'll take the call. We'll come back to this. San Fernando, good morning. You're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
You know, I listened to all the, as I said in the beginning of this issue, I was one that was willing to give the benefit of the doubt for the support of this legislation. But as a government, you have to listen. I listened to Mr. Alec, the Homeland Security Minister, speak on the day of in an interview on the day of the passage of the rejection of the bill, and he said, these were his words. They're talking about zone of special operations, I'm paraphrasing here.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that we already have zones of special operations that we operate in.
Mm-hmm.
He said that
Mm-hmm.
to try and say, well, if the bill will pass, we're already doing this here. When I always thought that they would have had to have some kind of compromise. When I listened to the end of the debate, when we thought it was going to go to committee stage, and I listened to the pleas of the Attorney General, saying that what it's talk about just now, saying that they had valid amendment, the independents had valid amendments, and he said, and something that Senator Alwari said were valid as well.
Mm.
He pointed out 52 amendments were suggested by the independent benches.
Right.
The Attorney General did that. But he said that but we're running out of time. We have to do this. And I am saying, so is it the intention? Is it now that the government has decided that the only way for the country to have a proper crime fighting is through some sort of emergency power regime? Is that what they're telling us? That the police can no longer operate without a state of emergency or something that is similar? If this is the case, then we reach where we're going. If this is the case, that they're saying that the police service can no longer fight crime without some sort of emergency power, without taking away rights from the citizens, you can't tell me that all these suggestions that you see nothing valid. Is it because that this is now a hardline government, and the position is our way or the highway? After the bill failed and passage failed, and the Prime Minister on utterances, and I keep saying the same thing. You're the absentee Prime Minister because you're still only giving statements. You're only issuing statements. There is no longer confidence in crime fighting in Trinidad and Tobago by the public, and this collapse of this bill says it all. And that shooting that took place with that couple in the car, that adds to added fuel to the fire. That added fuel to the fire, and the commissioner is not exuding confidence. He is not. He is, as you said, this blue wall that they seem to put up the blue wall like it's automatic. The commissioner could have said things differently to de-escalate the outrage of the situation, but he chose not to over multiple days. So, and when the Prime Minister said that she is not willing, she's not willing to concede any amendments, and she's not going to bring back the bill. Come on. So then it's about you then. It's not about Trinidad and Tobago. It's not about the citizens then.
Yeah.
Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Again, what I say, what is the potential agenda? We don't know, right? First, I want to get this out there. I might reiterate this point. I might start to say this more. The blue wall is sacrificing the many for the sake of the few. It is sacrificing all of the officers' reputation for the sake of a few officers. And that's why I said before, and maybe it wasn't clear as to why, the other officers need to speak up. Other officers who are clean, who are not involved with this, who think it's fine, I keep my head down, I'm not involved, don't put me involved in that situation, I want nothing to do with it. Well, the problem is your reputation is tanking. All right, St. James on the line. Caller, good morning.
Yeah, morning, Sean, morning.
Morning.
You know, I look at this thing all around, you know, day, night, morning, internet, TV, radio, and so on. And, you know, I feel the government really didn't have to go to do this because when Gary Griffith was in power, he cordoned off a lot of areas and he went in with dogs, metal detectors, everything. Likewise, if they had somebody that was interested in that area, probably they would have a warrant for that person too. But you don't need state of emergency or that special bill to cordon off an area if you have intelligence on a drug cartel person, and anything come in or out will be searched. So I don't see that bill keeping back the police from really. The only thing might keep them back a little bit is the get any warrant. But then to correct me if I'm wrong, they say in this bill, going in those areas, it would have been must wear body cam, and these cases would have been sped up, would have been done speedily, the cases, right? So I think they don't need this special bill, but they need to do this follow-up based on all the intelligence they gather, all the drugs people, and they need to follow up, otherwise it could cause a more serious problem, you know. And then I want to say too, I look at the video well with the shooting and thing, and I don't want to make no comment case going on and thing. But what I found is that when I saw the first police officer came out on the left side of the police vehicle, he was behind and he was shooting through the windshield with that gun that he had there. I sure both people would have been hit in that car at that time before his other associates came out and they were shooting, but nobody seemed to be saying that. But that is what I am seeing. I am seeing the first officer and out the left of the vehicle was shooting through the back windshield.
Yeah.
One more thing I want to say, I never was no law person, but if I'm a police officer in high-speed pursuit of somebody running and there's a crossfire between you and I as a family man, I also frightened for my life, right? If I swing a corner, I know you is an exchange of fire coming down the road, I swing a corner and see you, they stick up in a thing. Sean, I sorry for some bias, you're not going to open fire in here. I'm very sorry if I'm sounding biased. I don't think I am.
You see,
but I'm also frightened for my life. I'm frightened if I will go back home. I'm concerned about my family.
But caller.
And no one, not one, especially these people who high up that you know. So I just want to say that. And one more thing I want to say I find coming up a lot that you might have known and I might have missed, right? When they had held Stuart Young family with the drugs in Westmoreland, how come she didn't get charged? I don't know if I missed that. Maybe you might know. You could tell me. I'll listen off here.
Thank you, caller. I think she was charged. I can't remember, though. I can't remember. Part of it, too, is to what end? If she wasn't necessarily primary to the case, that's the thing, right? Some people might say, no, she should have been charged. But I don't think she got away scot-free, right? Now, here's the thing. You're saying that you would have been afraid for your life. There's two issues with that. One, there is zero evidence that those police were shot at when they fired on the couple. There's zero evidence. They haven't produced a gun. The audio does not show gunshots. The audio shows the police gunshots clearly. And also, you can't even, that's why Gary Griffith said what I said. It doesn't matter if they were shot at before. And if you were shot at before and you're afraid of being shot, you don't advance on open ground. You stay undercover to engage. If you are afraid of being shot, to advance on open ground is reckless unless you know that you're in no danger or you're prioritizing attacking and shooting first in a situation where you don't have to. And that's the other thing. You are afraid. That's fine. You're a civilian saying you're afraid. They are police. Whether they're afraid or not, the job is to engage in violent circumstances as the rules of engagement dictate, as the law dictates. And I think I'm willing to say I don't think there's any legal justification for the shooting. You need evidence. You can't just say, oh, well, you don't know. It could have been this, so it could have been that. And I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm saying for people that want to say, well, we don't have all the facts, that's fine. But based on what we do know, it looks so bad, I can't even give you an alternative. If you're police and you're that afraid that you're going to just blast people unjustifiably, you shouldn't be police. You're not police, so it's fine that you think that way. They're police. They're not supposed to think that way. Fair or not. We have a caller on the line. Caller, good morning. Caller. Caller? I'm sorry, there's so much to get through before we close. Do we have the call on the line or did we lose the call? Caller, you there? I'm going to have to move on if we don't get a response. All right, so a couple other things. Mr. Sanfernando pointed out what the Minister of Homeland Security said. Minister Sage said something similar as well, right? The implication is that certain police activities, they wanted more legal cover. That there was dubious to zero legal cover for certain things that the police were doing. However, yes, the police do need emergency powers. Why? Because there are deficiencies in legislation when it comes to gathering evidence, investigating certain crimes, charging individuals. There are the burden of proof for evidence on the anti-gang legislation makes it impractical. They need emergency powers. Notice they never go after the gangs for arrests outside of an SOE situation. They need emergency powers. Some of the emergency powers in the bill that the zones of special operations order provided were beyond what the police were already doing. So they would have gotten legal cover for certain things that they're already doing, but they also wanted extra emergency powers in order to circumvent deficiencies in the law. Some of that is, on my opinion, based on observations and also results-based analysis, right? Now, here's the thing. The government, let's put back up the comments quick. Does the volume of amendments equal quality? Yes or no? That's irrelevant, right? Is it accurate to say the government rejected all the amendments? Yes, it's accurate to say that. That's basically what's said by both the independent bench and the opposition. Does the submission automatically mean each one is valid? It doesn't matter, because the government rejected all. And the AG, as you pointed out, said some of the amendments were valid. But they decided to reject the valid amendments anyway. The implication is that the AG admitted that there are deficiencies in our legislation that circumvents the rights of the population. This is not deficiencies in, we increase road traffic violations by a little bit or something like that. This is not like a small scale thing. This is a major, major thing that is cutting into the Constitution and setting a precedent that could cause worse precedents in the future. So to say that there are valid amendments, but we're going to reject them because of time, is potentially outright irresponsible. And also, the Prime Minister's criticisms is not about these things. The Prime Minister is criticizing the independent bench. The AG is saying time. Those are two separate things. If the Prime Minister was consistent with the AG, maybe there would be more precedence to the message that this is an issue of being timely. But the Prime Minister is more concerned about the politics behind the thing, which makes me think that she has a different agenda to the AG. And him admitting that some of the amendments are valid, is he admitting that the bill has flaws? Because now, his admittance that some of the amendments are valid and that they, yes, rejected all of them, basically sinks everything the Prime Minister had to say. All of the Prime Minister's arguments about the independent bench and the two senators and the blah, 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 and they're not really independent, all of that is irrelevant. Because you're trying to throw dirt on people while saying they actually had valid concerns. At what point do amendments stop being scrutiny and become a tactic to delay? Not at this point, because the discussion was not had over the amendments in good faith. They did not consider the amendments in good faith, and I could say that because they rejected it outright, because they're trying to rush it through. Let's not forget, I pointed to Keith Scotland made a very mature contribution with regards to the debate over the issue of justices of the peace being able to give out warrants to the police service. And the government was very adamant, the issue is time, the issue is time, the issue is time. And that might very well be true. But why is it that this is another area where the government seemingly wants to rush things and not potentially put safeguards in place? And by rushing things, those three officers rushed to shoot. Those three officers rushed to shoot. This is basically one aspect of when you rush to do things in law enforcement and don't consider it carefully enough before you take action. This government seemingly either has a track record of rushing through national security decisions or allowing for, tolerating for, or supporting rushed, potentially irresponsible national security decisions, right? So that's more or less everything I had to say on the matter. Do we have a caller? Or let's take the next. Okay, how do we get Parliament to evaluate amendments on merit instead of political alignment? Well, the AG, apparently, he evaluated it and said they were valid. He said that they were basically saying they're reasonable, basically saying they were worthy of consideration. He evaluated it himself. This is not him, this is not the independent bench saying we have valid concerns. He acknowledged that they were valid. The commissioner, it's not about him being measured with regards to his statements, right? That's how I'm reading it. The commissioner of police have to be measured with his statements. It's not about being measured. He's actually not being measured. He's being irresponsible. He's going too far in one direction, and it is very difficult for the public, I believe, to appreciate, to follow, or to agree with what looks like a measured stance in tone, but what is an extreme stance in terms of policy. Because it's an extreme stance because basically it looks as though he doesn't care about how the shooting looks. He doesn't care about the public perception. He doesn't care about the harm that it does to the service, to his own reputation. Two things can be right at the same time. What Gary Griffith said is right as well. Right, and based on what Gary Griffith said, Gary Griffith basically insulted the man. And I understand why, because I think he's incompetent. Right now, if you want to really have any significant impact on the trust and confidence in national security in this country, you have to, in my opinion, but you can't replace the commissioner. You have to, and you can, and it might seem unfair, but replace the Minister of Homeland Security. There was a third person, but I can't remember now. Not DCP Martin. That's a whole other kettle of fish that has a whole set of other baggage that might end up being the same thing. But on some level, I don't know if it was her fault why she was the first member of the executive to speak out about the issue. I just know that for the service, it looked very bad and inappropriate. That she was the one. What about, where was the rest of them? Then the commissioner spoke, and to be fair to DCP Martin, the commissioner, in my opinion, in terms of content, was far worse than what she said. DCP Martin has certain baggage. The service, not DCP Martin, the service should have recognized the fact maybe she should not take point on trying to explain the situation and how the police service is going to try to practice transparency and accountability in this situation. Maybe she shouldn't do it. The service, the commissioner, the executive as a whole should have come to that conclusion. It's not on her. And what she said was not unreasonable. It's just the context of her saying it, it doesn't help the situation as much as it should. What the commissioner said, regardless of who said it, was the thing not to say. If you want to cause people to hate the police service more, that's what you say. Well, sorry, you could technically say worse things. You could technically say worse things. But if you're trying to save face and solve the issue, I don't know if you could make a worse error in judgment on trying to be diplomatic and basically saying fire Bonoya. Because it looks a little bit two-faced. I acknowledge your concerns, I'm just not going to do anything about it. I acknowledge the need of transparency in the police service and accountability, I'm just not going to do anything about it. I'm going to revert back to the same measures that have been done for years, that have got us to the bottomed out trust and confidence in the police service. The same measures that have allowed the service to reach the point where it's 8% or less of the population, because I would argue it's less now, have trust and confidence in the police service as an institution. You're going to use the same measures that got you there, and somehow things you expected to improve? As Einstein said, insanity. So, Let me see if I'm missing anything. As I said before, the reputation of the many, the trust that the public would have in the majority of the police officers is being sacrificed on the altar of one squad, one song for the sake of a few officers. And if those officers that are being held hostage, remember EDCU said that about nurses. The good nurses are being held hostage by the bad nurses, by the nurses that take advantage of the system. The good doctors and dentists are being held hostages by the bad doctors and dentists that take advantage of the situation, that go on vacation whenever they want, that do what they want, that work less hours if they want. Because the state doesn't necessarily always know how do we enforce accountability. They might just pick up their bag and go, and then we'll be down a doctor. So some doctors in the public service, some dentists take advantage of the situation. And others in other positions with similar leverage. So now in this situation here, like those situations, the ones that work hard in the public sector are being held hostage by the miscreants, by the deviants, by the lazy. And in a lot of cases, they are not allowed to speak up. I get that. But on this level of severity, I don't think the rest of the police service could put their heads in the sand. And at the very least, they should have the capacity. You won the election, I believe it was an election, for being the head of the Social and Welfare Association. If the police service members cannot speak in an individual capacity, at the very least, if it is the case that the majority of the police officers have an issue with how things are going on, why is it that you're not speaking to your union representative to say, listen, you are harming all of us. You're making all of us look bad. You're making all of us look guilty because it looks like an institutional cover-up. That's what it looks like. It doesn't help when the commissioner says, don't reveal any more information to the public, guys. Secrecy, secrecy. I don't care the fact that it's a case that's an active investigation. I don't care. It is not the responsibility of the public to cover things up. And the police don't have the track record to justify any request to withhold information. As much as that seems wrong, as much as that seems unfair, that is the position that you find yourself in, and worsened with your inability to understand the strategic situation that you find yourself in. And that's why I say the Commissioner of Police is showing incompetence. Whether he is actually incompetent, I don't think he's a dumb guy. I think he's a smart guy. Now the question is he in over his head? Does he not have the prerequisite experience and skills for the big job? Because he did nothing with regards to certain aspects of policing as far as we're aware. And now the deficiencies are showing up. To what degree is he following the lead of the Minister of Homeland Security? It seems as though the government don't even have a coherent national security strategy. Because when you take Minister Stage, Minister Alexander, the Attorney General, the Prime Minister, the Commissioner of Police, when you really analyze what is the common message with regards to national security that they were putting out there. One saying we have to move faster. One saying the independent bench is corrupt. It's nothing to do with speed or any immediacy. One saying, I don't care about transparency, we don't need body cameras. And that's backed up by the commissioner. And Minister Stage was saying better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. If you think it's fake, cops shoot first, ask questions later. Not even on the same page with the Minister of Homeland Security on that issue, at least initially. This is not how a government is supposed to be run, folks. And I made this criticism on the PNM as well. But hey, what do I know, right? I mean, when the PNM was in power, I had a lot of people say, Sean, why are you saying this about the PNM? Why are you saying that about the PNM? Why are you saying the next thing about the PNM? Now, The UNC is in power. Sean, why are you saying this about the UNC? Why are you saying that about the UNC? Why are you saying that about the UNC? Listen, it's not even about the party, it's about the government. I'll call it as I see it. Those who don't like it don't have to like it. If you disagree with me, we could have a discussion. But come with some reasonable points. As much as possible backed up by facts. If the AG said that the amendments were valid, then think about it. That kind of answers more or less everything that one commenter had to say, if you think about it. All right. Just want to remind you about the blood drive in Mount Hope, TTMA Central Branch, Mount Hope North Central Health. Hold on, I want to get the full right up here that I have here. 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday, the 7th of February. That's the Saturday before the Super Bowl. Andrea and I will be filming on location. More on that later on. But Saturday, 7th of February, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Mount Hope Blood Bank, Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. Our February blood drive, giving from the heart, give love, give blood. Those who can, please do, because you never know how many lives might be saved in critical situations, in emergency situations. So folks, and also, you never know. You might be saving a stranger's life, but this is what it means to remembering our allegiance to each other. On some level, we all bleed the same color. Yes, I know it's a political color, but hey, forgive me, it's also a national color. And we all bleed that same one color. Sometimes I think we disregard all of the overwhelming commonalities and hyper-focus on the very small number of differences. Stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic. Hopefully on the 7th to each other. Well, hopefully every day. Be nice. We'll see how things turns out tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
WESN